you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge to the coming administration in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.
Now let's turn to the US, because it's the country, it's the world's biggest economy, it's the preeminent public health country in the world, it's got the world's best epidemiologists. I mean, why has it done so badly?
Well, we believe in freedom, individual freedom. We optimize for individual rights.
What about China, about which there's obviously a lot of debate? Should we blame China for, not being fessing up early enough, or should we praise them for the degree to which they got it under control internally?
Well, the country that's where a new virus shows up first has the toughest job because they have no warning at all. And so it's likely to get out in fairly big numbers. They clearly made mistakes. There were warning signs, people talking about it. They didn't go after it in those, the month of December and even parts of January. In retrospect, they could have rung the alarm bell more loudly than they did. After that, although in their typical fairly authoritarian way, they did a very good job of suppressing the virus. There may have been a lot of individual rights that were violated there, but the overall macro effect that they achieved is kind of amazing.
On day 6 of the smallpox epidemic, the White House confirmed that federal government officials and military personnel are being vaccinated. 300 people have died. At least 2,000 are infected with smallpox. Profound economic losses are crippling the nation. In Oklahoma alone, economic experts project severe losses in the state's multi-billion-dollar agricultural commodities market. Still, no group claims responsibility for unleashing the deadly smallpox virus. But NCN has learned that Iraq may have provided the technology behind the attack to terrorist groups based in Afghanistan.
Britain is braced for a dark winter as new measures are deployed to stem a surge of coronavirus. It's feared new cases will near 50,000 a day next month, with many deaths to follow. But fearing economic meltdown too, it's lockdown light for now.
In plain terms, prepare for a brutal winter.
There are unquestionably difficult months to come.
In just one day, new COVID infections nearing 5,000 with 37 deaths, the highest since July. As the situation spirals, the government is ordering more control in England.
We will enforce those rules with tougher penalties and fines of up to £10,000.
And after weeks of encouraging people back to COVID-secure work offices, a U-turn. Office staff are being told to clear the kitchen bench and work from home. Calling on the public to once again make sacrifices for at least 6 months. That's through Christmas and into the new year.
Global markets have plummeted from its high 5 months ago, and the Fed is now projecting a deep economic recession. Many domestic hospitals are failing due to lack of staff and supplies. Telework and social distancing measures are being encouraged by the CDC. Schools across the country are closed, and many public gatherings have been canceled. Public demand for surgical masks and respirators far exceed the available supply. National Guard units in multiple states have been deployed.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. International travel has turned local epidemics into a pandemic spanning the globe.
The World Economic Forum has convened this board because of your combined expertise, your backgrounds, and your global voice.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments?
We're at a moment where the social media platforms have to step forward and recognize the moment to assert that they're a technology platform and not a broadcaster is over. They in fact have to be a participant in broadcasting accurate information and partnering with the scientific and health communities to counterweight, if not flood the zone, of accurate information.
I think we haven't spoken about, and I'm wondering whether it's time to talk about this, is a step up from the part of the government on enforcement actions against fake news.
Conspiracy stuff dies down, it's really, the numbers kind of blow my mind. And it's not just the fringe people that you would normally think of.
It's not at all. I mean, I can tell you, I get stuff from people who seem, they have lives, they have families. I don't know if they genuinely believe this, if they've just been misled, but, and For me, it's, they claim I was on Jeffrey Epstein's airplane and going to his island with Tom Hanks, or I mean, just insane, crazy stuff. What do you think, I know internet companies are looking at this. Do you wish that they would play a role in taking stuff down, which is as demonstrably false? Because, I mean, it does have real world, it does have real world impact on vaccines, or, a nut showing up to a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. with a gun.
With Twitter on which accounts to take down, on basically what policies to implement. And behind that, you basically have the State Department telling these social media tech oligarchs what to do, because the internet is actually right now a more important and critical battle space than outer space, or than actual physical territory in some cases. And that's been clear that the U.S., through the State Department and its intelligence apparatus, has been trying to monopolize the internet itself to prevent Russia and China from competing and presenting a counter-hegemonic point of view.
Most of the transmission that's actually happening in many countries now is happening in the household, at family level. In some senses, transmission has been taken off the streets and pushed back into family units. Now we need to go and look in families to find those people who may be sick and remove them and isolate them in a...
Because we're already blurring the line about truth and reality.
Of course, there is some risk in people using this kind of technology for bad applications. Unfortunately, technology it's not possible to stop it. So the ethical path that we have decided is to show this to people, to make them know that this kind of technology is available, and so to make them more cautious on this kind of subject.
Of those numbers all the more viscerally, which makes it all the more imperative to contextualize and not sensationalize those images. Unfortunately, a lot of professional media has been erring on the side of, look at what America has come to. There are so many dead bodies, they have to start hiring people to dig mass graves. The site cemetery on Hart Island is indeed tragic. It has been for the past 151 years. Since 1869, prison labor has been used to bury unclaimed and unidentified New Yorkers in mass graves of 150. There's a little bit more context into this. This is not a new practice. This is a 151-year-old practice that the media is just starting to put on their front page and sensationalize. But even Elizabeth Nolan Brown gets it slightly wrong here. It's not simply because there are so many bodies that they now have more bodies to bury, more unclaimed bodies to bury. It is also because, as is reported way down at the bottom of some of these New York Post articles, no, the New York Medical Examiner's Office has changed their criteria for what counts as an unclaimed body. It used to be 30 days. They would hold a body for 30 days. Now they are holding them for 15 days. So there is less of a window for bodies to be claimed, which undoubtedly contributes some to the increase in bodies.
For Dr. Zike, how many have died from COVID-19 that do not have any other underlying health condition?
So nationally, the numbers are vanishingly small, in less than 10%. I think I saw something like 6%, and that might have been global numbers. So in the general statistics, Illinois has been similar to what the aggregate larger numbers have. So I would say that it's going to be definitely under 10%, maybe even in the single digits.
Thank you.
Their solution is what they are calling the Great Reset, an initiative that was officially launched this week. Now, the Great Reset is not a new idea that they just made up over the weekend, okay? This is a long-standing global governance agenda which ties into the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which seeks to regulate, control, and redefine all aspects of life as we know it. And in June of last year, the United Nations and the World Economic Forum formed a strategic partnership to accelerate the implementation of the UN 2030 Agenda. Now, here is a quote from the World Economic Forum about the Great Reset, directly from their website. In fact, one silver lining of the pandemic is that it has shown how quickly we can make radical changes to our lifestyles. Almost instantly, the crisis forced businesses and individuals to abandon practices long claimed to be essential, from frequent air travel to working in an office. Back in January of this year, 2020, the World Economic Forum founder and executive chairman Klaus Schwab was asked, what can we expect to be the focus of Davos 2020? And he referenced his book from 1970 on a new economic model called stakeholder capitalism.
We face an emergency situation, and we have not yet really the sense of urgency to address those issues. We see it now with the fires in Australia, and of course it's relatively difficult to get such a sense of urgency if the stock markets are doing so well as we see now.
Now we have economic conditions comparable to that of the Great Depression due to the fallout from the coronavirus lockdowns. And now, lo and behold, we have the justification for the Great Reset and the 50-year-old plan for the new economic system. Now, just 3 days ago, the World Economic Forum hosted a virtual summit for the Great Reset. Attendees included Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, the United Nations Secretary General Guterres, Prince Charles, the head of the International Monetary Fund, and a top representative from MasterCard, among many others. And the general consensus was that we cannot afford to miss this window of opportunity to implement the Great Reset because COVID has shown our current system to be broken.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system for the need for the post-corona era.
But these are unprecedented times. Every person on the planet has been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. Our world came to a standstill, and it became clear that we did not have the answer or the mechanisms to address such an unprecedented global threat. The threats posed by this dreadful pandemic came upon us suddenly with very little warning. We have a golden opportunity to seize something good from this crisis. Its unprecedented shockwaves may well make people more receptive to big visions of change. And global crises like pandemics and climate change know no borders and highlight just how interdependent we are as one people sharing one planet.
History would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset. From the perspective of the IMF, what we see is inevitably a very massive injection of fiscal stimulus to help countries deal with this crisis. Secondly, we know the digital economy is the big winner of this crisis.
Isn't it, I think, why this time might be a bit faster, which is China has done a huge amount to build up the sort of financial technology required for a digital world. If you look at the super apps within China, Alipay and all of those, they are much, much better and more sophisticated than what is in the West. And so I think they have moved ahead in actually the sort of financialization of the digital era in a way that could probably be exported, particularly to developing economies. And if developing economies are increasingly going to be forced to choose which ecosystem they're in, the Chinese one has some allure.
In short, we need a great reset.
Prime Minister, take a listen.
It's all too likely we won't be gathering for Thanksgiving, but we still have a shot at Christmas.
At issue here has been young people. About 2/3 of all the new cases are from people under the age of 40. And everyone here right now, they are saying, should be keeping those social contacts to a minimum. The problem has been that people have been doing things that they assume are harmless. Dinner parties, having friends over, and that has led to a lot of community transmission. The exponential growth is what's really concerning people here about
Europe looks set for a hard winter. Europe looks set for a hard winter. We begin with what's being called a decisive moment for Europe as it tries to get its arms around a second wave of coronavirus, a monumental task with the continent bracing for more deaths and even more economic damage. Remember, Europe is still struggling with its worst plunge in economic growth on record, and third quarter results are looming. At the same time, governments keep unveiling different measures to control the infection. In France, Marseille is now considered a maximum alert zone, that country's highest risk classification. And the French health minister says another lockdown is still on the table if things get worse. But people may be losing faith in all these control measures. Take a listen to what one senior member of the EU Commission said a short time ago.
In some member states, the situation is now even worse than during the peak in March. This is a real cause for concern. What this means, to be very clear, is that the control measures taken have simply not been effective enough, or not being enforced, or followed as they should have been.
Neil Ferguson es el académico británico que creó el infame modelo del Imperial College que advirtió a Boris Johnson que, sin un cierre inmediato, el coronavirus causaría 500.000 muertes y hundiría el Servicio Nacional de Salud. El gobierno de Johnson abandonó rápidamente su enfoque de distanciamiento social similar al de Suecia. Y el modelo de Ferguson también influyó en los Estados Unidos para que hiciera movimientos de bloqueo con su impactante predicción de más de 2 millones de estadounidenses muertos. Johan Giesecke, el ex-científico jefe del Centro Europeo para el Control y la Prevención de Enfermedades, ha calificado el modelo de Ferguson como el artículo científico más influyente en la memoria. También dice que fue, lamentablemente, uno de los más malos. De hecho, el modelo del Imperial College de Ferguson ha demostrado ser tremendamente inexacto. Para citar solo un ejemplo, predijo que Suecia pagaría un precio enorme por no instituir el bloqueo con 40.000 muertes por COVID para el 1 de mayo y 100.000 para junio. Suecia ahora tiene 2.854 muertes y alcanzó su punto máximo hace 2 semanas. Como señala Fraser Nelson, editor de Britain's Spectator, el modelo del Imperial College está equivocado en un orden de magnitud. De hecho, Ferguson se ha equivocado tan a menudo que algunos de sus compañeros modeladores los llaman el maestro del desastre. Ferguson estuvo detrás de la controvertida investigación que provocó el sacrificio masivo de 11 millones de ovejas y vacas durante el brote de fiebre aftosa de 2001. En 2002, Ferguson predijo que, para 2080, hasta 150.000 personas podrían morir por exposición a la EB, enfermedad de las vacas locas en la carne de res. En el Reino Unido, solo hubo 177 muertes por EB. En 2005, Ferguson predijo que hasta 150 millones de personas podrían morir a causa de la gripe aviar. Al final, solo 282 personas murieron en todo el mundo a causa de la enfermedad entre 2003 y 2009. En 2009, una estimación del gobierno, basada en el consejo de Ferguson, dijo que el peor de los casos razonable era que la gripe porcina provocaría 65.000 muertes británicas. Al final, la gripe porcina mató a 457 personas en el Reino Unido. En marzo pasado, Ferguson admitió que su modelo del Imperial College de la enfermedad COVID-19 se basaba en un código informático indocumentado de 13 años que estaba destinado a ser utilizado para una temida pandemia de influenza, en lugar de un coronavirus. Ferguson se negó a publicar su código original para que otros científicos pudieran verificar sus resultados. Solo lanzó un conjunto de código muy revisado la semana pasada, después de un retraso de 6 semanas.
The US government has allocated $6.4 billion to immunise its citizens against the virus commonly known as swine flu. Japan is budgeting $1.5 billion. Most other nations haven't released exact figures, but even the most conservative estimate takes the global pot of cash on offer to over $20 billion. Getting a piece of that is healthy for any pharmaceutical company's business. But UK-based giant GlaxoSmithKline is leading the way, with 22 governments ordering 440 million doses of its H1N1 vaccine at an estimated value of $3.4 billion. The impact on its bottom line is not lost on investors. Since H1N1 was first diagnosed in Mexico in April, GlaxoSmithKline's share price has risen by 36%. To put that in context, stocks of Johnson & Johnson, a big pharma not developing an H1N1 vaccine, have risen 21% in the same period. But 2 weeks ago, Johnson & Johnson announced a $444 million deal to buy a stake in Dutch biotech company Crucell that is working on flu vaccines, ensuring it doesn't miss out on the swine flu bonanza. And the World Health Organization has to rely on drug companies to do it. But the speed with which they've created H1N1 vaccines has caused some to question their safety and the real motives behind the rush.
The general public doesn't truly understand, what are the real problems of giving the responsibility of developing drugs to a private industry, because they maximize profits, they do not maximize health.
Deadly influenza pandemic or nothing worse than a mild case of the flu. Here in Thailand, their swine flu vaccination program has just begun, but in other parts of the world, serious questions are being raised about the handling of the pandemic. Health officials around the world had believed swine flu could kill hundreds of thousands, if not millions. They introduced emergency measures and spent in excess of $20 billion on vaccines. But now Wolfgang Vodard, head of health at the Council of Europe, says they got it wrong. Not only that, they were misled by the World Health Organization and unduly influenced by drug companies.
The WHO, in cooperation with some big pharmaceutical companies and their scientists, redefined pandemics and lowered the alarm threshold. Those new standards forced politicians in most states to react immediately and sign marketing commitments for additional and new vaccines against swine flu and spend billions of dollars to catch up.
France is one country feeling the prick of embarrassment. Officials spent a staggering $1.25 billion buying 94 million doses of H1N1 vaccine. So far, only 5 million have been used. Now the country, like many others that bought big, is trying to sell off surplus stock. Having committed to buy the vaccines, Dr. Vodag says health officials then sought to justify their decision.
Never before the search for traces of the virus was carried out so broadly and intensively. Besides, many cases of death that happened to coincide with seropositive H1N1 lab findings were simply attributed to swine flu and used to foster fear.
Nearly 13,000 people worldwide have died of the virus, the largest share in the United States and Canada. Officials say it's now peaking in Central Europe, parts of Asia and the Middle East.
Take care of yourself.
But it hasn't been the killer some predicted, when the figure of 12,000 is compared to more than 250,000 people who die of seasonal flu each year. Dr. Vodag says the H1N1 vaccine was not sufficiently tested and was needlessly exposed to millions of healthy people.
Now countries like Britain, France and Germany have stockpiles of vaccines lying unused as infections spread far less than the panic surrounding it. And now let's hear from Dr. Wolfgang Vodag, who's in Strasbourg.
The WHO has installed a private-public partnership with the pharmaceutical companies some 8 years ago. They started, and it seems that the pharmaceutical industry is has very successfully influenced the work, because they made a lot of profit with two false alarms of the WHO. First, it was the birds flu alarm, which never happened, and the second now was the swine flu alarm, which was just a normal flu as we experience every year, even milder than most of the years. And nevertheless, they succeeded to make such a big marketing out of it, using scientifics who were at their hand and using our governments, impressing them that they made contracts with marketing commitments which cost us billions worldwide. Yes, the WHO had a definition of a pandemic, and a pandemic is something very special, which is a big morbidity and a high mortality. And this was in the definition before, in 2004, 2005. You can read it in the WHO websites and in the papers. And this year, they suddenly dropped those two characteristics. They said nothing about the severeness of the disease, which is spreading, and they said nothing about the mortality, which is very essential for such a definition. And as the WHO was at the trigger to give the alarm for all which was prepared before, the WHO is the institution which has the biggest responsibility in this case.
When the World Health Organization gives advice, it can lead to countries paying billions to drug companies. That's what happened after WHO guidelines were published in 2004, recommending that governments stock up on flu antivirals like Tamiflu and Relenza. In assembling such guidelines, the WHO has strict rules about conflicts of interest. Participants with known links to the drug industry, for instance, must either be excluded from key meetings or have their conflict of interest made public. 3 noted scientists who took part in the 2004 guidelines all had self-declared links to drug companies, yet the WHO refuses to make the details public. One of the 3 is Professor Frederick Hayden of Virginia University. He wrote about the benefits of stockpiling antiviral drugs. He was also receiving funds from antiviral manufacturers until the end of 2004.
In the meantime, in spite of some resistance by the U.S. Congress and state and local governments against the Patriot Act, American civil liberties continue to be trashed. New laws, such as the Homeland Security Bill, permit the U.S. government to forcibly vaccinate American citizens against their will and then prosecute them as criminals if they refuse to accept untested vaccines. This, even as the vaccine makers have been granted absolute legal immunity if you or your family drop dead after receiving the shots, there's no one to sue.